see where we are. Okay, we're 18:14. So the church is holy in the sacraments. For sacramental grace seems to be ordered to two things principally, namely to the taking away of the defect of past sins, inasmuch as they are transient by act but permanent by guilt, and also for the perfection of the soul in those things which pertain to the worship of God according to the religion of the Christian life. So the sacraments have to pertain to the perfection of the soul in those things which pertain to the worship of God. But the sacraments have this power, especially from the passion of Christ, the power of which is in a certain way coupled to us through the reception of the sacraments, as St. Thomas teaches. The ministers of the church and of the sacraments are called the dispensers of the mysteries of God, to whom a mystery of reconciliation has been committed as well as a peculiar grace. So the sacraments in themselves are holy. They give grace. It's holy in its members, just as the church has the means of salvation, so it produces the fruit of sanctification. The following things prove it. One, the very nature of the thing, for the Savior taught that from the fruit of the tree is known, and that every good tree bears good fruit. And so if you follow the Catholic rule book, you will be sanctified. To the mission of Christ, the Savior said, I am come to cast fire on the earth, and what will I but that it be kindled? He also said, and for them do I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth. St. Paul, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from all iniquity and might cleanse to himself a people acceptable, a pursuer of good works. 3, the mission of the apostles and the ministers of the church. For our Lord said, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and have appointed you, that you should go and should bring forth fruit, and your fruit should remain. Then St. Paul says that the ministers of the church have been given for the consummation of the saints. 4, the parables in which we showed above that even sinners were members of the church. For the husbandman said, that means farmer, said in the parable of the wheat and the cockle, let them both grow until the harvest. Therefore there will be both cockle and good seed in the field of the church until the harvest, that is, until the end of the world. So there will be holy people in the church. D, the charisms and miracles of Christ are promised to the church. Argument 3 from the Testimonies of the Fathers. Holiness is a mark of the church. If the Fathers affirm A, that the church is obvious by its means of sanctification, B, by its holy members, and C, by its miracles. But this is the case, so all three are true. A, means of sanctification. St. Ignatius of Antioch calls the church the bearer of holiness. By others it is called paradise, the mother of the living, the journey to heaven, a spiritual bath, an area in which the saints are kept. 2, concerning sanctifying doctrine, many apologists have given testimony who from the first decades of the 2nd century promote the Christian religion to the emperors because of the sanctity of doctrine, and in general all antiquity, which denies that the faith of the church can ever be stained. Now think of all this, applying it to the Novus Ordo. See that is the Novus Ordo the bearer of holiness? Can you sanctify yourself by following the Novus Ordo religion? If you can, let's follow it. 3, concerning the sanctifying sacraments, the fathers have left documents in the tracts on baptism and in the rites used in administering the sacrament. There are also the laudatory texts concerning the excellent sanctity of the Eucharist. And then you have all of those. St. John Chrysostom calls the Mass a wonderful sacrifice, unspeakable mysteries, or ineffable. That'd be better. Means the same thing, but unspeakable sometimes could have a pejorative sense. And then you have B, Holy Members, Hermas, which is an early catechetical document, about to show that the just must always be seen in the church, proposes the parable of the tower. Vision 3, 5-6, into the structure of which both the just and penitent sinners come. In another place, he thinks very highly of the holiness of the church. Finally, the author of the Epistle to Diogenes says, through whom Christ, the church, is enriched and the grace poured out upon the saints is augmented. Then, after pointing out the sanctity of the members, he indicates the truth of the Christian faith with these words, these things do not seem to be done by man. These are by the power of God. These are an argument of his coming. And similarly, other fathers prove the truth of the Christian religion and the sanctity of its members. And there you have all the references. Finally, the fathers thought that the true church could be distinguished from the heresies by means of miracles. St. Irenaeus said, for they, the heretics, can neither confer sight on the blind, etc., and so far they are from being able to raise the dead, as the Lord raised them, and the apostles did by means of prayer, and as has been frequently done in the brotherhood, meaning the church, on account of some necessity, the entire church in that particular locality entreating with much fasting and prayer. The spirit of the dead man has returned and has been bestowed in answer to the prayers of the saints, that they do not even believe this can possibly be done, and hold that the resurrection from the dead is simply an acquaintance with that truth which they proclaim. St. Augustine teaches that the church obtained the height of authority, the heretics having been damned partially because of the majesty of the miracles. Objections. Objection 1. The mark of sanctity is proven from Ephesians, where St. Paul says that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. But such a perfect sanctity cannot be ascribed to a visible church, therefore one cannot speak of the mark of sanctity. I distinguish the major. The mark of sanctity is proved from this text. I concede from this text alone I deny, and I distinguish the minor. This sanctity of the church cannot be attributed to a visible church. Adequately, I concede. Inadequately, I deny. Adequately in philosophy means completely or totally. For the grace of being the mystical spouse of Christ is given in the fullest manner to the church triumphant, that is, in the final term of redemption. But in an incomplete sense, the grace of the church militant is perfect, since it possesses holy doctrine and immaculate institutions, and the faithful whom Christ prepares for the triumphant church are sanctified in the militant church. See, that's part of the holiness of the church. It's a very strong argument against the Novus Ordo. These things you could not possibly say about the Novus Ordo. It doesn't possess holy doctrine. It possesses condemned doctrines and immaculate institutions. So, So he's saying the church, even in its state of the militant church, anything that pertains to the church as such, in other words, anything that pertains to its doctrines, its rites, its sacraments, is immaculate. In other words, is holy. That certain people don't live up to the holiness of the church, yes, but Christ even desired that, one, in order to give everyone a chance, so to speak. Secondly, to have the visibility of the church, because you could not have a visible church if it were only the just or only the predestined. See, so that is something that is tolerated. Instance, what is merely internal is not a mark, but the sanctity of the members is internal. Response, I distinguish the minor. The sanctity of the members is principally internal, I concede. Exclusively, I deny. Despite the hypocrisy of many, nevertheless, the sanctity of the sincere is manifested by the virtues, heroic acts, and grace of miracles. For from the fruit the tree is known. Novus Ordo. Instance, domination is taken from the greater part. Denomination. Denomination means how you name something. But there can be more evil people in the church than good. I distinguish the major. Denomination is taken from the greater part when it concerns an extended quality, I concede. In other words, if the apple is mostly rotten, you would call it a rotten apple. See, if you're just talking about how much of it is rotten. So he concedes that. If it has a little rot on it, you wouldn't call it a rotten apple. You would say, well, it's a little rotten. See, but it's a good apple. You can cut off the rotten part. See, so he's conceding that. But a non-extended quality, meaning some spiritual quality, I deny. A wall which is mostly white is called a white wall. In other things, however, a name is taken not from its greater part, but from its more important part. Or as St. Thomas says, denomination is done from form, which gives the species to the thing. So the holiness of the church is taken from its intrinsic holiness, that is, it is founded by Christ, who is God. It has a holy means of sanctification. It produces this sanctification by use of the means of sanctification given to it by Christ. See, that pertains to the very essence or form of the church. That some people don't live up to it does not pertain to the essence or form of the church. And again, if you follow the rule book, you are sanctified. Just as if you read the instructions before you operate a machine, you will operate it correctly. If you don't read the instructions, all right, the thing might break, or you won't obtain what you want. You know, if you operate a toaster while in the bathtub, for example, you're going to have a very unpleasant experience. I mean, if you use the thing the way it is meant to be used. See, that's the point. Objection 2. That which is common does not distinguish. But miracles are not proper to the true church. Therefore, they do not distinguish. Proof of the minor. There are miracles of Satan and of idolatry. St. Paul admonishes that in the reign of Christ, of Antichrist, there will be false miracles, whose coming is according to the working of Satan in all power and signs and lying wonders. Even Christ cautions us with these words in Matthew 24:24. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. In the Apocalypse we read, "And he did great signs, so that he made also fire to come down from heaven unto the earth in the sight of men. And he seduced them that dwell on the earth for the signs which were given him to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make the image of the beast, which had the wound by the sword, and lived." Response: the argument proves too much and inclines toward the abrogation of faith in the miracles of Christ and of the apostles. Their miracles can be distinguished from the operation of Satan, or they cannot. If they can, then why not other miracles which have been performed in subsequent centuries? If they cannot, then Christ would have said absurdly, "If you do not want to believe me, then believe the works." So he's making the point that you can distinguish a true miracle from a false one. Otherwise, Christ's words are meaningless. B, I distinguish the proof of the minor. Miracles can be performed by evil people in testimony of the truth. I concede. In confirmation of error, I subdistinguish. False miracles I concede. True ones I deny. So God could use even an evil person to perform a miracle in confirmation of the truth. It is against God's wisdom and truth to give a miracle in confirmation of falsehood. The true miracle, since it transcends the whole order of created nature, is done by God alone, who cannot be a witness to falsehood. Indeed, the signs of the false prophets in sacred scripture are called lies. So the first criterion of a miracle is, what is it confirming? Instance, St. Augustine said of miracles, "Whatever such things happen in the Catholic Church are to be approved, because they happen in the Catholic Church. The Church is not therefore manifested because these things happen in it. Therefore sanctity cannot be one of the marks." Response, I distinguish the antecedent. St. Augustine speaks in such a way, respectively I concede, absolutely I deny. Since the Donatists were boasting of their fathers, their councils, and their miracles, St. Augustine, in order to close off their escape, said that even if all these things are taken away, one must look at the Catholicity and universality of the Church. For in such a way the Donatists were most evidently confounded, asserting that the Church of Christ was founded in Africa alone. Furthermore, Augustine held that the charism of miracles to be so important that in the Retractationes he believes that he must very explicitly declare that miracles were not confined to the early church, but that they would continue in subsequent centuries. All right. Article 4, whether the Church of Christ is Catholic. Definition of the notion of Catholicity. The mark of Catholicity is that property of the Church by which it flows out to the whole world as conspicuously numerous and everywhere one. So the Greek origin is kata and hole. That's not what they say at bullfights. Kata means according to, and this means whole. So kata hole, it's Catholic, right? According to the whole. So we're going to see that you cannot have Catholicity unless you have unity, because it is one thing applied to many. It is universality. You see, universality, the Latin is unum versus, toward, alia. See, universalia. It's the same word. So the unum is necessarily a part of it. So if you lack unity, unity of doctrine, unity of worship, etc., and unity of government, you cannot possibly have universality, Catholicity. So it presupposes unity. So the word Catholic is taken from the Greek kata olon, that's the neuter, which means katolon, that becomes a th. Don't worry, ask Father Fleece, he'll explain the whole thing to you, which means according to the whole, or universal. For the church can be said to be Catholic or universal, A, by Catholicity of place, because it is throughout the whole world. And even you might say, well, yes.
Does the Greek word holon, is that where holy comes from? Word holy?
No, holy comes from the German word heilig. Heilig. Heil is, well, you know, Sieg Heil. It means like trying to think of a good English word. You know, it's something really good. Like salve, or that comes from the idea of salvation. You see that? In other words, it's a type of greeting. You know, so heilig is something that is set apart. You know, but no, it doesn't come from. No. Holistic would come from the Greek. Holistic, like holistic medicine or something. That's Greek. But no, it comes from Heilig. All right, so throughout the whole world, even when it was confined, say, to the Roman Empire, its mission was to the whole world. In other words, there was, and as Christ said, go everywhere. So even if it was not in North America and South America or the Pacific Islands or those places yet, it had a mission to the whole world. So in that sense, it was Catholic already from day one. What are you laughing at?
Excellency, I found a video on Mythbusters where they actually put the toaster in the bed.
Yes. As I said, it would be very, very unpleasant. So B, by Catholicity of persons, because it embraces many and rejects no one. So all races, peoples, regions, from Eskimos down to Africa, to China, everywhere, everyone's included in it. It's not a national or ethnic thing, which is one of the problems with the Greek Orthodox and all of the Eastern rites. Is, in order to go to church at the Greek Orthodox, you have to love baklava. In other words, it's so ethnic. It is impossible to detach it from its ethnicity. Same thing with Russian. It was founded by the Tsar, the Russian Orthodox Church. Everything is it's so tight with the government, and so tight with Russianness that it cannot be universal. And that's the beauty of the Latin language. is that it is the living language of the universal church, that no one speaks except the church. So that it is talking universality, and that's very important. That the Catholic Church never take on an ethnic idea. And that's why the popes always wanted to never be part of Italy, because it's not an Italian church. So, but that Catholicity, that cultural Catholicity, you might say, does not exclude that in various countries, Catholicism is going to have a certain flavor, just like ice cream. It's the same thing, but it will have certain ethnic flavors, definitely. And that does not offend Catholicity. The Catholicism in England looks like is as cold as an ice cube in comparison to Catholicism in Spain. All right? And as far as the decoration of churches and Baroque and ceremonies, apart from like processions, you would never see those things in England. They're very reserved. And it's the Catholicism in France is different in flavor from the Catholicism, say, in Germany or other places like that. Or it is that's not offensive, or even the Eastern rites is not offensive, because they are all united under the same government. That there is a certain ethnic, flavor is not offensive to Catholicism. So Catholicity, by Catholicity of time, because in its present state it will endure from the time of Christ until the end of the world. So again, that indefectibility is in Catholicity of time. See, in its present state. D, by Catholicity of doctrine, by which the whole church preserves the doctrine of Christ. That is absolutely ruined by the Novus Ordo. That's in ashes in the Novus Ordo. It has no such mark. Nevertheless, Catholicity of time does not seem to pertain to the mark of Catholicity as it is a mark in the strict sense, since it refers partially to the Church's perpetuity, which is another word for its indefectibility, and partly to its apostolicity, which also pertains to indefectibility. The same must be said for Catholicity of doctrine, since it is precisely by means of the marks that is made known where the integral totality of Christian doctrine can be found. See, the marks are signs to the whole world of the truth of the Catholic faith. So you can't say the truth is a sign, because something cannot be a sign of itself. So strictly speaking, but that is, it's a sign in the sense that its perpetuity would attract someone. In other words, that if the perpetuity of doctrine and indefectibility of an institution can be seen, that is attractive to someone who is pursuing the truth. In that sense, it is a sign. But strictly speaking, doctrine cannot be a sign of itself. I mean, how could you have a religion that is totally consistent in doctrine and which endures for 2,000 years without some assistance from God. All right. 2, it is said to be a property of the Church, for it does not concern just any kind of universality, for example, that of Buddhism or Mohammedanism, but of that Catholicity which Christ promised to his Church. So it is not merely a movement where there is, a general consensus of certain doctrines. It is a church, a visible church, with a hierarchy and a discipline of doctrine. Anathemas, excommunications, and it's a universal church. It's not localized. See, so you can't say, well, all the Muslims believe that Allah is God, and that, various other things they might believe, that all Christians are going to hell, whatnot, and that you can kill a Christian whenever you want. If it's in the Quran. If someone is perceived to be somehow an enemy of Islam, you have the right to kill him. That's in the Quran. He says, kill them wherever you find them. It's in the Quran. I read it myself. But according to George W. Bush, it's a religion of peace. So the words conspicuously numerous are added in order to signify not that all men will join the church, but that multitude is required, by which the Church of Christ, by its fecundity and majesty of its numbers, can be discerned from sects. So it has to spread itself in order to conform to Catholicity. It has to spread itself throughout the whole world, whereby it is an obvious thing or something that is easily seen, which it did. For flows out into the whole world. This means not an expansion which is physically universal, but morally, that is, an expansion which corresponds to the nature of the church and to divine institutions. For the church did not immediately penetrate the whole world, but growing like a mustard seed, has filled and still fills the world more and more with a wondrous fecundity. And as I said, by the 1930s, the whole world had seen the Catholic Church. And that's one of the, according to the Catechism of the Council of Trent, one of the things that must be fulfilled before the coming of the Antichrist is the preaching of the gospel to the whole world. And the second thing is the great apostasy from the faith. That's number 2. The third thing is the coming of the Antichrist. So we have none of those things had taken place in 1570 at the promulgation of that catechism. 2 we can check off already. And 3 doesn't seem to be very far off. 5, it is of the greatest importance when we say, and everywhere one. Indeed, if unity is lacking, then a Catholic church is not seen, but churches condemned to a counterfeit Catholicity. And again, the Novus Ordo, it's a counterfeit Catholicity. For material Catholicity is of no use, but formal is required. In other words, simply a Catholicity of government is not enough. Coca-Cola has a material Catholicity. You go everywhere in the world, you can find Coca-Cola and it tastes the same. McDonald's has a material Catholicity. I saw one in Moscow. Written in the Cyrillic script, transcribed into Cyrillic. So that's it's a material Catholicity. This is not merely as I said, a Catholicity of institution or something tangible. This is a Catholicity of doctrine, a Catholicity of sacraments, and everything that pertains to the soul of the church. For this reason, St. Thomas says, one and the same thing is that which is believed by all the faithful. Therefore, it is said to be one or universal. And because the unity of faith cannot even be conceived of if you take away a single ruler, it is as clear as day that the mark of Catholicity depends on a certain center of ecclesiastical unity. From what has been said, it is apparent that Catholicity does not consist simply in the right to preach everywhere, but in the fact of its outpouring. That's why there was a drive of missionary activity in the church. People giving themselves over to the worst possible conditions. Young men getting their heads chopped off and everything in order to bring the gospel to all those martyrs who brought the gospel to the Germans and the various barbarians. I mean, they went through many times martyrdom, but they went through an awful lot of trouble. But there was a drive in the church to constantly expand and move. In 19th century, like the Irish that went to, the French first went to Nigeria, and they just died because of the diseases that were indigenous to that land. Just as when the Europeans brought over smallpox to the Indians here, everybody died. Many of them died because they were not used to the diseases. And so the French went in and just died. Then the Irish went in and managed to somehow survive, and they evangelized the Nigerians. And so St. Patrick is the patron of Nigeria. I don't know if you know that, because of the Irish clergy. But Ireland was full of a very, very strong missionary spirit. They sent missionaries all over the world, and France did too. I mean, the North American martyrs, but many others who weren't, maybe they were martyred, but many others who put up with horrible, just incredible hardships in order to bring the faith to indigenous peoples. That drive is a sign of the assistance of the church. The Greek Orthodox didn't go out and preach Greek Orthodoxy to the whole world. They sent priests to where there's Greeks, like Tarpon Springs, where they would dive for the sponges. There's a lot of Greek Orthodox in Florida because of that. They would dive for sponges in Greece, and so they came to Florida and they dived for sponges in Tarpon Springs, which is down by Tampa. It's called Tarpon Springs. It's full of Greek Orthodox and Greeks. If you want any baklava and other Greek things, you can get that, yes. Sponge, éponge in French. Ich weiß nicht. The original sponge was a type of, I don't know if it's a plant or a fish, and you take it off rocks, and you come up with the water, and that's the original sponge. But then they manufactured artificial sponges since that. But that's the sponge. That's actually called a sponge. Is it a fish or a plant? Does anyone know? It's a very primitive animal. Is it? Okay. Diving. Oh. No, they're not that valuable. Yes. I'll have to be more. I have to enunciate more. No, you can only sell a sponge for about $1 or so. Anyway. But beware not to take this fact too mechanically or mathematically, as if the expansive vitality of the church would not be subject to the movements of ups and downs which correspond to divine help and the attacks of the gates of hell. See, so what is important is that the church is always trying and moving in that direction, but it is subject to attacks of Iroquois Indians, for example. Or being eaten, things like that, or Chinese emperors. The requirements for Catholicity. It seems that 3 things pertain to Catholicity. A conspicuous number of faithful, both absolutely, that is, in itself, and relatively, that is, in comparison with other groups, to whom we attribute the name of Christian Church. So, Protestants, Schismatics, etc. B, a real expansion into the whole world and simultaneously, by which the church at the same time attains all people morally. In other words, it makes itself available to all people. Successive expansion is not sufficient, by which the church would be called Catholic, not because of being in many nations at once, but by adding 2 nations in which it once was, the nations in which it now exists, was in the nations in which. So I don't know exactly what he means by that. Was in the nations. See, a vitality which does not defect, by which the church, expelled from one region, is born in another. And so it is inexhaustible that the group is ever obvious, to which Christ committed the propagation of his faith. So, for example, the church lost Northern Europe in the Reformation, but it gained the New World, and it gained the Far East at the same time. Because exploration was concomitant with the Reformation. The Spanish would always take priests with them on their missions, and the first thing they would do, it's in a book about Junipero Serra, they would erect an altar. When they landed someplace, they would erect an altar and have Mass. Spanish.
What is the book there?
It's called, I have it. I'll find it. It's a very interesting book we should read it, about Junipero Serra. Yeah, he was a Spanish priest. You see, I think it was well, anyway, they came up to what is known as Alta California. That is the state of California today, which is a lunatic asylum. Okay, But it was, it's a really nice lunatic asylum. But the that was called Alta California at the time. It was part of New Spain. That means high California because there's Baja California, which is that peninsula which is part of Mexico today. That's Baja. Low California. And so there's a lot of mountains in Alta. And that was the Spanish colony. And so he led a group of missionaries, and he founded all of these missions, which are still in existence today as museums. You can visit the missions all up the Spanish coast. And he was the one that named San Francisco, because he said this is such a beautiful bay that it should be named for our patron. So he named San Francisco. So that's why you see so many saint names in California. Santa Barbara, all of those are mission names. San Luis Obispo and all of those. San Juan de Capistrano, which was destroyed by an earthquake, a beautiful church, and it was destroyed by an earthquake many years ago, I think in the 18th century.